Every few years, the same stories resurface. Different people, different places, different decades, and yet the details rhyme. Lights in the sky that move in ways we don't expect, encounters that blur the line between waking and dreaming, and witnesses who hesitate to speak, not because they want attention, but because they don't trust what they saw. If you've been listening to this show for a while, you know that recently we explored a story known as the Other Humans, a long anonymous account that resurfaced online and laid out an unsettling version of humanity's place in reality. Well, whether you found that story compelling or troubling or deeply skeptical, the response was the same on all sides. People couldn't stop talking about it. And that reaction is what made this episode necessary. Because the real question isn't whether that story is true. It's why stories like that continue to appear and why they resonate so deeply with us, even when we don't want them to. Tonight, I don't want to talk or ask about what UFOs are. I want to ask something more uncomfortable. Why do these stories refuse to disappear? Welcome to Beyond the Map. I'm Buddy T. In this episode, we're not talking about belief, and it's not about debunking either. It's about persistence. Why, if UFO stories are just nonsense or random, meaningless noise, they should have faded away by now. Well, history is full of myths that didn't survive contact with modern science, but this one did, and not quietly. UFO narratives have survived radar, satellites, the emergence of cell phones, cultural ridicule, government denial, and decades of scientific progress. That alone tells us something important. There's a tendency to frame this topic as a false choice. Either every story is a fantasy or every story is literal extraterrestrial visitation. Well, I don't think either position really explains what we're seeing. So tonight, I want to step back and look at why the stories persist at all. What keeps this subject alive, even among people who don't want it to be? The human brain is a pattern making machine. It evolved to find meaning quickly, especially under uncertainty, fear, or awe. When something unexpected happens in the sky, when a moment breaks the rules we think we understand, our minds reach for structure. Now, this doesn't mean people are lying. It just means they're human. Pattern recognition helps us survive, but it can also lead us to connect dots that aren't fully visible yet, and sometimes dots that aren't there at all. Pattern recognition alone doesn't create consistent stories across cultures and decades. It explains some sightings, some interpretations, and maybe some embellishments, but not the entire phenomenon. Stories evolve. They shed details and they absorb new ones. Folklore, religion, ghost stories, all of them follow patterns. UFO stories are no different. The language changes, the imagery updates, and the technology evolves, but the structure stays strangely intact. Encounters, missing time, a sense of being observed, a disruption followed by confusion. Now, this doesn't discredit the stories at all. It contextualizes them. Culture acts like a lens. It shapes how experiences are remembered and described. But here's the problem. Cultural transmission explains how stories spread. It doesn't really explain why certain elements survive unchanged. And that's where the narrative gets pretty interesting. There are known human experiences that overlap with UFO reports: sleep paralysis, environmental factors, stress responses, advanced military technology, neurological effects. These explanations matter, and they explain a large percentage of the cases we see. But here's the critical point. They don't explain all of them, and they don't explain why witnesses with no shared background describe similar core elements. You can explain individual events. You can't easily explain recurring structures that appear across geography, across generations and cultures and belief systems. And that leads us to the part most discussions avoid. After psychology explains what it can, and after culture explains what it shapes, after technology explains what it reveals, there's still something left over, a residue, cases that don't collapse cleanly under scrutiny, witnesses who gain nothing by speaking details, that the details which remain consistent even when the story itself is restrained. This residue doesn't prove anything, but it demands attention. And this is where most serious investigators quietly live, not in certainty, but in unanswered questions. The story persists because unresolved things don't go away. They wait and wait. We're in a different moment than we were 20 or 30 years ago. Government language has changed dramatically. Military acknowledgement has changed. Public openness has shifted, not toward answers, but toward admission of uncertainty. And that's significant because when institutions stop insisting they understand everything, people feel safer admitting they don't understand it either. Well, that doesn't create stories, but it does allow the existing ones to surface. And as I started mapping these patterns, not just the sightings, but how the stories evolve, how they persist, one name kept appearing, not in the headlines, not in the official documents, but in footnotes and anecdotes and inside conversations. Project Moondust. Well, I'm not ready to unpack all that just yet, but it connects directly to everything we've talked about tonight: persistence, patterns, and the space between explanation and mystery. Now, that's coming. The most important question in this subject isn't, do you believe? It's what remains unexplained and why. Because stories don't survive this long without friction against reality. Something keeps pressing back. And until we understand why, the stories will continue. If you like strange stories, please like and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us stay online. And I'll see you next time here on Beyond the Map.